morning and welcome to the Mays MasterCast. I am your host, Ben Wiggins, and I'm joined today. We have a real treat for you guys today. I'm joined by Professor John Krajicek from the Business School. Professor Krajicek, it is a pleasure to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, Ben. Thanks for asking me.
Absolutely. Been looking forward to this one. So we're going to jump straight in with our normal icebreaker question. What is your favorite superpower?
Ben, I could answer a lot of things, I think, but probably my favorite superpower is mindfulness. And let's define it quickly for those of you who don't know. Mindfulness, the definition that I operate under comes from a guy by the name of Jon Kabat-Zinn, and it's a three-part definition. It's the ability to be present right here in this moment, not lurching towards the future or stuck in the past, not mind-wandering, but actually here, present. Number two, with intention, doing that with intention, aware that you are aware, in effect. And then number three, non-judgmentally, which is something that I fail at routinely, but at least I make the attempt to be non-judgmental, to be open. And that state of those three things combined is a state of mindfulness.
So you frame that as a superpower, the idea being that it's a power that a lot of people don't have. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate statement. A lot of people don't have it, and it's a constant struggle for me too, in a way, because we live in a world of distraction. We live in a world that increasingly pulls our attention away at every moment. You know, things are a little different than they were when I was young. I'm a pretty old guy, but not that mindfulness was an easy feat even in 1972, but it was a lot easier to be present, to be focused on the here and now, because there weren't so many wonderful things and toys and gadgets and things diverting our attention. I mean, cell phones probably are the number one thing today, but it's not just phones. The whole culture itself is, from the moment we wake up in the morning until the time we go to sleep at night, it's almost as if we're all ADD. You know, the culture is teaching us to be distracted because of all the interesting, wonderful things. It's I'm certainly not a guy who longs for the old days when we didn't have cell phones and 1,000 television channels, et cetera. I think that's wonderful, but there is a downside. There's a pretty serious downside, which is that most people live in a constant state of partial attention.
It's sort of a dopamine arms race almost.
Yeah.
And it feeds our short attention spans. I'm guilty as well. I have a very difficult time with mindfulness sometimes. Interestingly, I have an easier time with it when I'm by myself. But then again, that's probably how it is for most people. It's easier to be mindful when you can control the frame of the conversation and so forth. If you were to, so one more thing on that, if you were to offer one piece of advice for our listeners in terms of developing mindfulness, if you were to offer a try this one weird trick to increase mindfulness, any thoughts on what that would be?
Well, I'm going to give you two.
Okay.
One, if you're really serious about it, you really want to make an attempt at it, then meditation is absolutely the best way. And of course, meditation carries a lot of baggage with it, mainly because it comes out of long-standing spiritual traditions, and people tend to associate it with Buddhism, Hinduism, although every major religion has meditation in its history. But these days, meditation is often taught and practiced in a very secular way, nothing to do with spirituality. It's just a way of training your brain to be present. So, someone who is interested in improving their ability to be mindful, I would say meditation is a great tool, a great practice to work on that. A simpler, kind of easier thing is the shower. The shower is something, most of us take a shower every day. And when you're in the shower, where are you? I would say most people, if you ask that question, would say I'm anywhere but present. I'm processing my day. I'm looking forward to my day, whatever it may be. I'm completely lost in thought. It's just a way of having a reminder. Nothing magical about the shower, but it's a way of just having that routine, okay, when I take a shower, I'm going to take at least a minute of that time to actually be mindful and present. actually hear the water, feel the water, smell the smells, just be completely present. So it's just a way of having a reminder at least once a day to be present.
Fascinating. Let's zoom out for a moment. So this is going to be maybe a different conversation than the ones we've had before, and maybe the ones that will follow. Who knows?
Shock and awe.
Tell the listeners a little bit about your background. What got us to here today?
Well, it's a strange story, and it's another question that we could take 30 minutes on, and I'll try to be brief. I have a very unusual background. I'm both a former CPA, certified public accountant, and a former English teacher, taught literature and several other English classes here at A&M. Mm-hmm. I've never met anyone who has quite that varied of a background, but that says a lot about who I am. I'm just extremely interested in a huge variety of things. But that's what got me here to being an executive professor at Mays Business School, teaching business communications, is having that really wildly different background of many years in business. I had my own CPA practice for a while. I worked for what was then the Big Eight, now called the Big Four. And but then also a life of writing and teaching writing and thinking about communication. I never dreamed that it would dovetail into a position like this. It's not that I set out to be a business communications professor when I was young. It kind of fell in my lap at a wonderful time, and it's been fantastic. Been at Mays Business School now for about 13 years, I believe. At A&M for 22, and this has been an incredible gig. So, but I've been able to draw on that past of teaching, writing, literature, both creative and technical writing, as well as my experience in the business world.
You draw on your past in a variety of other ways as well. You do a lot of things. You are a painter. I've seen your work many times. It's very good. You're a professional musician as well, an avid golfer, kind of a modern Renaissance man. So what drives you to keep your interests so broad?
Ben, it's an interesting question for me, because when you say what drives me, I'm not sure I can pinpoint something that drives me to do that. It's just who I am. You know, by nature, I'm a person who has really wide interests. I cannot imagine being bored. I don't understand how anyone could ever say they're bored. Just the endless possibilities of things to get involved in, things to get interested in, things to experiment and dabble in. It's another cool thing about life today. You know, when I was young, it was a little more difficult to navigate your way and be a musician one day, an artist the next, and a professor the next. But today, it's easy. You know, that another upside of the technology, it's made it easy to do things like record. My band makes CDs, and you know, in my day, you had to be signed by a record company to do that. But it's who I am. You know, I suppose the downside of that is sometimes I think of myself as being a mile wide and an inch deep. But that's who I am. I can't not respond to that need in me that says there's more. There's more things to get interested in, and endless fascination with things.
I think there's so much to life. We only get one shot at it. And the idea of spending all of our time doing just one thing or even just two things, well, that's a great solution for some people. But
absolutely. Yeah.
For others, and I would put myself in the same boat as you, having done a few things myself, it just seems like, why would you not try as much stuff as you can? Now, to be fair, for some people, breadth of interest is expressed in something more like they just want to see as much of the world as they can.
Sure. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely.
But for me, I think you and I are kindred spirits in this way. There's something about activity and doing, the actual doing of things, that is fulfilling in a way that maybe nothing else is.
Yeah.
And you're very open with your students about the breadth of your interests as well. You talk about your art, you talk about your band, you talk about your background. What do you think makes you choose to be more frank and even to invite the students into your other interests outside teaching?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ben. I wasn't always that way in the classroom. I do tend to be an open book. It's true. I don't make a lot of distinction between aspects of my life. I think a lot of people kind of compartmentalize. This is my personal life. This is my family life. This is my professional life. This is my life with my friends or whatever. It all runs together for me. I think that I tend to try to approach all aspects of my life with the same kind of authenticity. When I first moved over here from the English department to the business school, it was an interesting move for me because I'd been teaching for years and I thought I was a pretty good teacher at that time, but I failed miserably in the first few years. I'm not sure that's fair to say I failed miserably, but I didn't live up to my expectations. And one reason why is because when I got here to the business school, I think without really putting a lot of conscious thought into it, I thought I needed to be more buttoned up. I needed to be more distant from the students and not share my life the way I did when I was teaching, sophomore lit, where I had more of an approach of kind of like the homeroom teacher in high school, very personal with my students. And I tried to be more buttoned up, more professional. I thought that's what was called for here, and it did not work out very well.
So what made you decide then to be more mindful, if you will? What made you change?
I'm not sure I'd use the word mindful there, just more open. I think more open about sharing my life and who I am, being more authentic, trying to connect more with the students on an authentic level. And to connect with people, you've got to be honest about who you are. If you're hiding something about your life, or you're compartmentalizing and saying, I'm only going to show these people this aspect of my life, there's something in people that knows that you're not completely being forthcoming with them. And
That's the truth.
So I just came to a point where I wanted to be open, and this is who I am. So that worked out really well. I could give some credit there to one of my colleagues, Janet Marcantonio, who was a former student of mine and now is a colleague of mine. And she was pretty instrumental in that because she had a perspective of being both my student and my colleague. And I was going through I'll try to make this quick. It could be a long story, but I was going through a particularly trying time 2 or 3 years into this gig of being a professor here at Mays, and things weren't going well. And she gave me a perspective. She said, now that I've gotten to know you as a colleague and as a friend, as opposed to how I knew you in the classroom, I think you need to show yourself more to the students and be a little more open about who you are. And she was spot on. She was spot on. I literally went, Ben, after that advice and really thinking about it, I went from having kind of disappointing student evaluations, not having a lot of job satisfaction. 2 years later, I won the favorite professor award from the MBA students. I mean, talk about a 180, and I haven't looked back since then.
Do you think that it's always that kind of openness? Obviously, you wouldn't change anything. That's clear from the way you're describing it. But do you think it is always well received by all of the students, or is there some faction of the student body that would prefer you? And maybe this question is academic, but is there some faction of the student body, the MBA student body, that would prefer you do things differently?
Absolutely, of course. You always have that. I think anytime you don't play it safe, you're going to have your detractors. And I'm sure there are some students in the class who would rather me not show my whole life to them in the way that I do, be quite as open and make an attempt to connect with them as much as I do. But this is who I am.
You talk a fair bit about family life as well. I understand your daughters, Emma and Isabella, are both artistic. So my question regarding that is, are they similar to you stylistically? How is their art close to yours, or how is it different?
Yeah, they're very different. Very different. And actually, both of them are adopted. And so biologically, they're different. But they've also just, I think, responded differently to be around my wife and I. My daughter, Emma, is more of a classically trained, pure musician. Mm-hmm. She's right now studying musical theater in college, freshman year in college. Let me tell you, that's tough as a dad, saying goodbye to your daughter and moving to a different state. Yeah. But she's an actor, or an actress, and a real pure musician. and very interested in musical theater, for example. Not so much the visual arts, although she's dabbled. My 7-year-old, about to turn 8, Isabella, is not so much artistic. She's interested. Like any kid, she draws and paints and is interested in some of the things I do, and is a bit theatrical sometimes. But she actually wants to be a veterinarian. She loves to ride horses, and so my daughters are very, very different people. And I don't think it's just because they're adopted. I think just we've allowed them to become who they are.
It sounds like you've encouraged them to be their own people, which is, knowing you makes total sense, but not knowing you personally and just knowing that you're a professor in the business school, you might not expect that. What were there any moments that you had challenging times as far as simply accepting them for who they were? Were there any moments where you thought, I don't like this aspect of
my daughter?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, sure.
I think any parent has things about their kids that might be annoying or that they wish were different. But really nothing that I think is worth mentioning here, other than just things. I wish my oldest was more organized. She tends to be very disorganized, and I've tried to talk her into keeping a list of things to do her whole life, her whole 18 years, and it's just not her. She's still struggling with that. So, of course, there are little things here and there, but no, not really. Nothing comes to mind there.
I'm sure you've advised them to put their creative sides out into the world. What advice would you give someone that is nervous about showing their creative side?
Well, this might sound a little simplistic, but my first advice would be, don't worry about what people think. It depends on what it is. If we're talking about an engineer who secretly paints, for example, as cliche as maybe something like that might be, I would say, why are you worried about it? Why are you worried about what people think? Why are you even painting? Are you doing it in order to show your paintings to the world? Well, if so, then don't be shy. Do it.
Show your paintings to the world.
But if you're doing it to tap into some creative side because it brings you fulfillment, brings you joy, then don't worry about it. Don't worry about what people think. So I think it's something critical for everyone. I don't care what profession you're in. I don't care whether you're a scientist, whether you're a CPA, you're a marketing guy, or what you are. I think it's really critical to tap into your creative side, and whether you show that to the world or not, I think it will come out in your work.
One thing that I think our culture gets right more often than it used to, not everything about our culture has improved over the last 20 years, as we've discussed, but one thing that I think we do get right a lot now is in encouraging people to accept the breadth of their selves, the breadth of their interests, and to say, if you are an engineer who paints, that's charming.
Yeah.
That's individual. It's you.
Right.
And embracing really who you are in all of its idiosyncrasies, exactly as you said earlier, is I think something that is just more generally, I guess, accepted is the best word.
Yeah.
So then your music, let's talk about your music for a second. What is your favorite song that you've written?
That's so tough, Ben.
We asked the tough questions.
I'll cheat and mention a few. My wife's favorite song of mine, and it is one of my favorite songs, is a song called "For You to Breathe," and it's a personal favorite because it's about my mom, and specifically about my mom's death. It was pretty interesting experience because I'm one of 7 children, and all 7 of us were gathered around her bed when she died. No one else was in the room but us, and so we were able to really share that incredible moment with her. Yeah. And my mom's last words were rather poignant. She was trying to say something and motioned to my youngest sister, and she leaned over and she whispered in my sister's ear, "I need to lay back so I can read my life." And wow, right?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so that became a song, and so that's one of my personal favorite songs. And I think one of my best songs is a song called "Occurs to Me" that plays with the way, kind of plays a little bit with free will, and it plays with the idea that whatever you can think of, whatever you can remember, is a little bit out of your control. That it's just whatever you remember is just what occurs to you, and you can try to remember things, but memory I sometimes call it the medium of the must have been. I don't think it's terribly accurate most of the time, and I know a lot of research tells us things like we don't really remember events. We remember the last time we remembered them. And then after remembering again and again and again, you end up getting more and more distance from what really happened.
Sure.
And that song kind of plays with that idea.
I hadn't thought of that, but I'll have to turn that over a little bit later. My writing partner out in California and I are writing a graphic novel right now, and we deal extensively with the concept of free will.
Oh, nice.
But not as it applies to human beings, as it applies to other beings. We'll talk more about that offline.
Interesting. Yeah.
So you write music, you have a band.
Mm-hmm.
What's that like for a mature adult to be in a band? How did everything come to be, and what are your advantages in that world, and are there any disadvantages?
It's wonderful. It's fantastic. It's one of the most rewarding aspects of my life, frankly. I've always had a passion for music, and I've played in bands most of my life. I didn't really play in a serious band that had gigs until well into my 30s, and the truth is, I play in 3 bands right now.
Yeah.
A little bit crazy. That's kind of a long story, but one of those bands, it's not really a band. I think of it as a project. It's called Borderline Social Club, and essentially, I invite a different cast of characters over to my house at different times, and we sit on my back porch and we record more acoustic, folky, country, bluegrass style of music, and we record those and put them out on Facebook, and that's incredible. It's a different band every time. It's a lot of fun. It's far exceeded my expectations. In terms of my 2 bands, my other bands, one is more of a studio band by necessity because my bass player lives in Colorado. The other is more of the live band, and it's a new project actually. I'm just having a blast. I'm 62 years old, and I'm playing with guys in their 30s, and I'm old enough to be their dads, and it's fantastic. It's like I don't think about the age though. Really, I don't know when you ask about advantages and disadvantages. Maybe I have a wisdom or a accumulation of experience that helps me approach things differently than I would have had I done this in my 20s or 30s, but. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I don't think much about my age. I just think in terms of this is something I have a passion for, and I'm very fortunate to have these guys to play with.
It makes sense that I feel like if you're playing with guys in their 30s, mm-hmm. there's probably, you probably have more in common with them than you might in terms of just scheduling and, understanding professional concerns and working around things schedule-wise. You probably have more in common than you would with if your bass player were 18 years old.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're all family guys, and a couple of them have kids, a couple of them don't, but they're all married, and they all have professions and professional obligations and family obligations, and I think that's important that I've ended up with guys who have a similar passion for music that I have, but also realize that it's not. We've got to keep it in its place.
I have an answer in mind to this one, but I read somewhere once that the way U2's music matured as they aged, they were talking about songs that Bono would have written at age 44 that he never would have written at age 21, mm-hmm. songs about fatherhood, for example.
Yeah.
How do you feel the flavor of your music is different than it would have been if you had done this when you were younger?
Well, coincidentally, that is one way. If I sit down and look at the subject matter of my songs, mm-hmm. almost, I would say 75% of them have to do with my family, or my loved ones in one way or another. So I think there's maybe a better way to answer that or to explain that is that when I was younger, I probably was trying to write about things that I thought were important to people or that were somehow profound instead of writing about my own personal experiences. And that's something that I've come to, fortunately, is that the best way for me to write is to write about what I really know and what I feel and what I experience on a daily basis. And so that's one way. The subject matter has changed. I suppose musically I've gotten better. And so I've probably opened up a lot of possibilities in terms of what kind of songs I can write. I'm not as restricted. I'm not trying to write rock music or country music or folk music. I'm dabbling in all kinds of different genres. And that's another thing that has opened up in our culture now. Is it used to be you had to choose, man. Are you a rock guy? Are you a country guy? What are you? Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter anymore. You can play anything you want to play, and you can move from one song to the next, from genre to genre, and that's wonderful. And so that's probably influenced my songwriting as well.
Obviously, you feel like your creative side helps you as a professor.
Yes.
So let's flip it around. Do you think students, especially STEM business majors, should be more in tune with their creative side? There are certain stereotypes. Well, let's just talk broadly about it, and then let's talk about stereotypes.
Well, my answer is a resounding yes. I think that first of all, I think you have to define what creativity is here, and I don't want to put it in too much of a box. But creativity doesn't necessarily mean you're painting or you're acting or you're dancing or you're making art. I think of creativity as an activity in which you are challenging your frustrating expectations. You're challenging the accepted mental models. You're trying to make something new, whether that something new is a new framework or a new idea or a new painting. You're trying to create something that is not necessarily expected and is in some sense is a new way of looking at the world. I think that's what good artists do. They make us look at the world in a different way, and they create something out of that doesn't necessarily sync with expectations. So when you define creativity that way, certainly business majors need to tap into their creative side. Think of any great breakthrough in business, from Steve Jobs to, you can look at Warren Buffett. People wouldn't think of Buffett and Mr. Practical, Mr. Omaha folksy as a creative guy. He's incredibly creative.
Wonderful writer, by the way.
He is a wonderful writer. That's right. So whether you're talking about questioning the market, questioning business practices, questioning the way we do things, thinking about a new product, whatever aspect of business you want to choose, you absolutely need to be creative. And so I think it would be a really good exercise for a business person to occasionally dabble in something, maybe in their garage or whatever, something creative that has nothing to do with their daily business life, in order to tap into that right side of the brain, that creative side of the brain that too often gets ignored. I think that will then end up influencing their professional life in a really positive way.
There are certain baseline expectations, and students have to make sure that they are meeting those expectations. Would you have any recommendations for how a student, especially, for example, a first-year MBA student, would balance the need to meet those expectations with expanding their horizons in other ways? Any thoughts on how you would approach a question like that?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because I know that it can be the program can be overwhelming for people, and they sometimes, I get the feeling they feel like they're just barely treading water as it is. So there's no way that they have time to do something like dabble in painting or something like that. But time management, it's so critical. Ben, you and I have had conversations about time management. I know. I think that is one of the things that students learn in the program that they maybe don't expect, is that they have to learn time management. They have to learn their own version of time management. And so I would say, you obviously in your first semester here, you've got to take care of business, and it probably does not leave a lot of time outside of class and study for other pursuits. But you've just got to work it in. Eventually, you've got to figure out a way. There's a couple things that are critical, and that would be some downtime, some me time, whether it's vegging in front of the TV or hanging out with the family or whatever it is, some kind of downtime where you're not really trying to do anything, you're just being. And then I think some kind of creativity is important too, whether that means to you. And then, a social life as well with your friends. Now, it's hard to juggle all that when you're overwhelmed by a challenging program. Mm-hmm. But I think our best students and most of the students really find their way to do that. And what a great unexpected benefit that would be then to carry into their lives, that ability to manage all those balls up in the air at the same time.
The two best time management hacks I ever heard were, one of them I got from my dad, and I'm not sure where I got the other one from, but the first one was create big blocks of time. Mm-hmm. Because if you have to get into a higher brain space, you can't get there in 45 minutes. If you're solving really challenging cognitive problems, you can't get there in 45 minutes. And it really, 4 hours is better than 2. 2 hours is better than 1. So create big blocks of time. And then the other one was take at least 30 minutes a day for yourself.
Yeah.
Every day.
I'd love to add one more to that.
Please.
Excellent ideas. You have to organize your life in a way that allows for ease of transition. And let me explain what I mean by that. My guitars are all hanging on the wall at home. I've got a guitar up at my office here. Mm-hmm. My canvases and paints are all at the ready. If I get my kids to bed, my wife goes to bed, and I have a couple hours to do something, and I don't have papers to grade, for example. Mm-hmm. I don't have to pull guitars out of a closet, open up a case, get it all set up. It's ready at a moment's notice. Same thing with my painting. So I may only have 30 minutes, mm-hmm. but I don't have to. I'm not frustrated by the need to set it up. It's set up, and that's with real intention, so that if I have 15 minutes to spare here or there, I can do it. And so I think that's another important thing. Just organize your life in a way that makes things like that a little easier in the moment.
Sure. Let's go back to your course. So you teach communications here, and developing emotional intelligence is a critical part of that course. What do you think led you to put such emphasis on that?
Well, let's stop for just a moment, if we can, Ben, and define emotional intelligence. Sure. I think a lot of people probably have some misconceptions about what it is. It's being aware of your own emotions, and unfortunately, a lot of people are not very in touch with their emotions. When I first started teaching this, I literally had people saying to me, "Emotions? What emotion? This is business. What are you talking about?" Of course, we all have emotions, and many of us are not very much in touch with that. We repress them or we ignore them. So it's an awareness of our own emotions, and then the ability to manage those in the moment and be aware of them and how they are impacting our performance and our response to situations. And then also understanding others' emotions and being able to read faces and being able to feel with people and kind of figure out where they are and then using that as a guide to how to interact with them. When you look at that definition, successful communication absolutely requires emotional intelligence, because you've got to communicate in a way that allows you to manage your own emotions and the kind of emotional currents that come through your own communication, as well as understanding where others are. You've got to feel with someone and have some sense of how they're responding to you and the world in order for you to reach that person.
Mm-hmm. So obviously business students may have some struggles with this, especially if they're coming in with an attitude of, I'm going to learn how to connect these dots and mm-hmm. make this chart, and then I'm going to have an MBA. As with most MBA classes, students in your class should expect to be pushed, stretched. Mm-hmm. In what ways do you carry that out?
Yeah, let me respond to that in several ways. One, the idea that I'm going to connect these dots, I'm going to learn some business principles, and I'm going to get this MBA so that I can then be successful in business. That's great. Those things are important, but do you want to be a leader? And a lot of our students come here saying, I want to work on my leadership skills. Well, if you want to be a leader, then you better work on your emotional intelligence. The old models of leadership are pretty much dead. The old models that say, I'm the leader, here's how I do things, everyone line up and do it my way. We understand now that it's much more like parenting in the sense that do you treat people differently? Yes, of course. If you're paying attention, you do, because you know different people respond to different things. You treat people fairly, but if you're approaching every person with the exact same approach, you're not going to be very successful. And that requires emotional intelligence. So how do I stretch my students? Well, apparently a lot of people, at least here in the United States, fear public speaking more than they fear cancer. And one way I stretch my students, in my class, the stretch is not so much the grade. I know in some courses, it's incredibly stressful, and it's difficult for them just to make a passing grade or make a B or let alone an A. I would say it's relatively easy in my class to at least make a B. So the grade itself is not so much the stretch; it's the activities. So as you know, I do something called Stand and Deliver, where I'll call on a student and have them get up in front of the room and basically give an impromptu presentation on a topic that they're not aware of until they're in that moment. So that kind of stretch. I know a lot of students really, really are afraid of public speaking, get nervous about public speaking, so I really push them in that way. Writing assignments as well. I like to give challenging writing assignments. I think you would agree that writing is something that is effective writing is declining in our culture. People are struggling with the ability to communicate effectively in writing, and so I push my students with writing assignments. And then I think I also challenge their thinking. I think that my lectures are designed to make people really think about themselves and think about communication, think about interaction with others. So I think I challenge them in that sense as well.
Interesting. So something you said a moment ago piqued my curiosity. I do think that especially longer form writing, we're not as good at that as we used to be.
Yes.
In what ways, though, do you feel like today's student is stronger than perhaps the student of yesteryear, the student of 20 years ago? In what ways has our culture developed better students?
Nice. Yeah, I think one way, despite the fact that a lot of people still fear public speaking, I think our students now, as compared to 22 years ago when I first started teaching, are better at public speaking. There's more of an awareness of the need for that, more of I don't know whether it's the Facebook culture or what, but there's more of an awareness that you have a brand, that you have a presence in the world.
Everybody does.
And I think 20 years ago, and certainly going back further than that, when I was in school myself, a lot of people had no interest in that, no awareness of that. They just were who they were, and they did their job. And there's a little more of a sense now of a public, that everyone has kind of a public persona, and that persona is very important, and it's part of the equation. It's part of work. It's part of their success is working on that. So the result of that is I've just been blown away at how good so many of our students are at public speaking. Just amazing. I think also just diversity. I think there's more of an awareness of the need for diversity, and more embracing of diversity, and which in turn has caused students to probably feel more comfortable about being themselves. So those are probably some of the ways that we have improved. We certainly have. A lot of people my age like to complain about young people, and back in my day, we did this, we did that. There are some downsides to our culture now, certainly, and I talk about them, but there's certainly a lot of upsides. I'm encouraged by our students' performance these days. It's amazing to me how well they perform under pressure. So how do you feel about the current education system? Not so much the students, but the system that they function within. Some of the things that you've said today would suggest that you probably like a very broad approach to education. I would think that our education system generally encourages people to specialize a fair bit. Mm-hmm. So how good a job do you think that we're doing? Education is a competitive market, so the thought would generally be that market
diverts value to entities that are carrying out their function within the market in a good way, that are carrying out their function well, and diverts resources away from entities that are not carrying out their function well. So you would think that the education system, broadly speaking, would improve over time. But what do you think we are doing well? And you can't say mindfulness. I'm going to cut that one for you. You can't say mindfulness. But what do you think the education system does well, and what is it not doing as well?
This is difficult for me to answer because I don't consider myself, despite the fact that I'm a professor, I don't consider myself much of an expert with respect to education with a big E. But let me make a stab at it.
Sure.
I think that one of the things that we do well today is it's not quite as cookie cutter perhaps as it was in the past. I know that when I was going through my master's programs and my PhD work I did many moons ago, back before the internet, it was probably more rigid. There was probably more, this is how it's done, and you just fit yourself into that mold. I think there's a little more, it's a little more open now. There's a little more understanding that people go about things differently. I don't know, Ben, that I will say, I'm not sure this is a fair answer to the question, but I'm just gonna kind of talk off the top of my mind about education today. One of the things that worries me a little bit is the whole online thing, and we are moving that direction. We are moving towards online, and I understand the necessity for it, and it's not gonna go away. It's only going to become more and more of a reality. And in fact, business is conducted more and more that way too. A lot of my students tell me that it benefited them greatly to give presentations in class, but virtually 90% of the presentations they give in their business career these days are virtual presentations. So it's all important stuff, but I miss the classroom in that sense. I think the classroom is so important, that marketplace of ideas and challenging each other and watching each other learn, and that kind of community, that discourse community in the classroom that maybe you have in a distance learning in an online setting, but not quite as palpably as you do in that classroom. So I miss that. But I think I'm avoiding your question. I'm not sure what to say about the education system today.
But so let me push back a little bit. Actually,
yeah, please.
I think there is a lot of interesting stuff in what you just said. But and you and I agree on so many things. In this one, I think I may be the poster child for the online course. And I love Socratic interaction, but I don't know how aware you are of this. I'm a really bad classroom learner. I'm a really bad note taker.
That's what was going on. I'm like, no.
So I have a lot of trouble staying engaged when I have to sit still.
Yeah.
And one of the benefits of an online learning method is when I get restless, I can get up, walk around, take a 5-minute break, come back to a video or whatever other online method of learning I'm using, and it's not disrespectful.
Right.
And that was a constant struggle for me, especially in the first semester where we have so much time. You move so fast from one place to another, and then you sit still for 2 hours and then do the same thing again. And especially when we were dealing with Career Corps, my first semester, it was a lot of sitting still. And ironically, the amount of the activity levels that are expected from us in that first semester, that wasn't a problem for me. I was like, I got energy for days. Let me do stuff. But the sitting still for long periods of time was really tough for me. And I know I'm unusual in that way. But I think that like you said, I do think that our ways of teaching young people, and maybe people who aren't so young, are more flexible now, and that's good.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's a method that addresses sort of both things at the same time. To me, the best answer is a small classroom where you can just have a conversation and the professor, the instructor, whoever, can lead a discussion. To me, that's the best answer.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a larger class size, I do think there's something to be said for giving the student a little bit more control over when and how the information flows in a way that you can still be respectful to the process. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with that at all. I think that there's so many different ways you can go about it, and it's one of the cool things about a program like this. Hopefully you have a lot of variety with respect to the way the professors approach things, and we have flipped classrooms, and we have more and more things like case competitions outside of the classroom, and our career services people are doing a whole lot more with our students. I have to admit that there's something in me that says, as difficult as it may be, it's important for us to practice the ability to sit still for 2 hours.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this as well.
Yeah, and I don't want to force feed that, and I do want to recognize difference. Like I said, one of the good things about our culture now is we recognize diversity, and it's not only racial and cultural diversity. It's a diversity of ways that people learn, and I think that's important for us to do it. But something triggers in me the response, Ben, you need to work on the ability to sit still for 2 hours.
Yes. And I did. I was forced to.
Absolutely, and you did a great job, by the way.
Thank you. So let's move to some rapid fire. I think we've got some great stuff here. But
okay.
Let's move to some rapid fire questions. Hopefully in 20 words or less. What do you consider your most valuable failure?
I've had a lot of failures in my life. I think anytime you put yourself out there, you're going to fail. I think failure is really important. This may be a cop-out, but I don't like the word failure. And when we're talking about this, valuable lessons, things that you tried that didn't work out, I think would be a better way I'd like to frame it.
Sure.
I mean, a divorce, for example. Obviously, I've learned a lot from a failure like that. But I think I'll choose to answer your question by saying, again, not so much a failure, but my attempt to be an accountant. It really didn't work out too well. It's just not me, the traditional accountant. And I was working at Coopers and Lybrand, and I was potentially, I think I had a career there, and I was doing a good job, but it really wasn't feeding who I am, and so it didn't work out. But it was extremely valuable experience. Mm-hmm. I learned a whole lot, and I wouldn't be right here in the business school today if not for that failure of mine, if you want to call it a failure.
Okay.
So one lesson I take from that is you got to try stuff, man. Get out of your box and try stuff, and don't be afraid to fail, because I mean we say that it's cliche, but it's just so true that you learn from failure. You learn from falling down, making an attempt, getting back up, and dusting yourself off and moving on. So I would just say to people, don't be afraid of failure.
Great.
That was more than 20 words.
It's all good. I enjoy your openness. You are a very open guy. Do you think people still have misconceptions about you? If so, what do you think their biggest misconception is?
Well, I'm told that, and I think I'm going to trust this, that some people see me as aloof, and that overly critical of others.
Okay.
And I think it is a misconception. I deeply care about people, and I really want to help others. I tend to be very honest. In fact, this goes back even when I was a child. My nickname in my neighborhood by the adults was Honest John. And I've always been a truth teller. And so the downside of being a truth teller is that people think you're overly critical. Maybe people think you're perhaps arrogant or aloof at times. And the reality is I'm trying to help people. And I've found a profession, I found a job that allows me to be a truth teller in order to help people. But I think that does carry its downside, which is sometimes people think I'm overly critical.
My stand and deliver, we talked about stand and delivers. I wasn't going to tell this story, but my first Stand and Deliver in your class, you actually stopped me in the middle of it. And there were a few words and phrases that you pointed to as inaccessible, which was fair. It was a fair thing to say. And then I came up to see you in your office a couple of days later, and you said, we sat there talking for a few minutes, and you said, I don't know if you're aware of this, but you come off very differently here one-on-one than you do in the classroom. And I'm not sure why that was. I know that I was much more comfortable. I felt that I could engage with you in a way that I had not been able to in the classroom, but I think that was more just a function of not being as familiar with my fellow students. There were a lot of other things in the room that were, I don't know if I would say distracting me, but it was that the first several weeks of your class were very challenging for me. I feel like I found my stride a little bit later on.
You did, and I think you know this, but what I was trying to tell you there was that you're an extremely engaging, warm person, but you were coming off as a little bit distant in front of the class, and I was just pushing you to be more yourself and connect with people. And
it's funny. Nietzsche says, "You stare for an abyss." Nietzsche says, "Stare into the abyss, and the abyss stares also into you." But I found the opposite to be true as well. When you open yourself up, when you say, "Here is my soul, see who I am," people respond by doing the same.
Yeah.
They say, "Oh, well, here I am.
Yeah.
Here I am. See me as well, and let's be kin to each other, and and be kind to each other. Hopefully,
that's
as well."
Beautiful.
So, if you could have anyone as a mentor for one day, who would it be?
You know, there's so many people. A business person I've thought of there is Bill George. I don't know if you know who Bill George is, a former CEO of Medtronic, and he's a guy you'll see on business programs on television, making as a commentator and whatnot. Written several books on leadership. True North is a book I think you probably encountered.
Yes.
He's a guy I greatly admire. But you know, you just said, you mentioned kindness a minute ago. One of the people that comes to mind when people ask me who are your heroes, who would you like to mentor, is actually the Dalai Lama. And
that's a good answer.
And when asked to describe his religion, do you know what the Dalai Lama responded? He said, "My religion is kindness." And I think he's a guy who I could probably benefit from being around for a day, you know, and just really seeing that kind of true embodied kindness.
It makes me think of what you said earlier about meditation. I don't think so my religion, I happen to be a Christian, but I mentioned to Shannon a few weeks ago that if I were choosing a mentor, I would maybe choose a religious leader from a religion that's not my own.
That's a great answer.
I think some of the problems in the world right now, and I think that everyone would agree that we have some problems happening at this moment. I think some of that comes from, as much as I hate to say it as a religious person, some of that comes from the fear of religious people to engage with other religions and to say, what is good here?
Yeah.
What benefit can be had here? What can I learn from these people whose way of life is different than mine? And there's sort of, maybe the fear is that if my own religion is the true one, as I believe, then I want to distance myself from anything other than what I find to be the inerrant truth, because that's sort of false or hollow in some way. Yeah. And I don't think that's true. There are many people who believe in Islam. Islam is not my own religion, but I think that there's so much to be gained from people who see the world in that way.
Yeah.
And being willing to adopt a different perspective and say, what is valuable about this? What is good in this? Is so important. And that actually, I think, is something that we don't do well yet, but we are getting better at, is not being xenophobic about other philosophies.
Amen.
So,
well said.
What is your fondest memory of something that's happened since you've been at Texas A&M?
Well, of course, student awards. I've won several teaching awards, and those are great memories, especially the ones that were voted on by the students. That just was incredibly touching. But I'll mention something that was pretty important to me. A few years ago, you may recall we had Richard Spencer speak here on campus, and there was a pretty vigorous response, shall I say.
Yes.
And I was there. I showed up, and I was just so impressed that in this traditionally conservative university, we had such an outpouring of peaceful demonstrators to say, not I'm going to prevent this guy from speaking. I'm not going to scream and shout, but I'm just going to show up in a spirit of love and diversity and openness. And it's something that I'm not sure you would have seen that at A&M 20, 30 years ago, maybe. But it was a beautiful thing to see. Yeah. It really was. And I'll be honest, it got a little ugly towards the end. There were some people that started getting a little bit violent and saying some things to the policemen who were there that were disrespectful. And at that point, my wife and I checked out and said, okay, it's time to go home. But for that hour or so, where it was just a spirit of not challenging anything, just to say we're here, and we want our voice of peace and diversity to be heard. It was beautiful.
It's such a tough line to walk, the line between freedom of speech and I don't even know what the other side of the line would be, but to tell someone you can say more or less, there are certain exceptions, but to say more or less whatever you want, even if I think it is terrible and atrocious.
Yeah.
And to allow people to do those things is some of what makes our country great.
Yeah, I think we've lost our way a little bit there, and ironically, the left. I think it's one of the problems with the left today is deplatforming speakers and whatnot. And traditionally, the left was the side of free speech, and I understand it's as you say, it's a very complicated issue. But man, I think we have to get back to that. I disagree with what you're saying, but I defend your right to say it.
Right. So what do you have coming up? Do you have anything to plug? What's going on? What's going on with your art? What's going on with your music? What should people know about?
Well, if you ask me what I have to plug, what my first thought I have is vote. It's not me, but I want to plug voting. People, vote, please. We have upcoming elections. It's important that you vote. I've always got something to plug, Ben, of course. I have a new band called Alone Stars. It's my new live thing, and we are playing first Friday, November at the Grand Stafford. I don't know when this interview is going to air, but if it's before November, first Friday, then we will be playing at the first Friday at Grand Stafford, downtown Bryan. So got that to plug. And Leavenworth, we're working on our third CD. We're about halfway done with that. So hopefully, if not this fall, early next in 2019, we'll be releasing that.
I have the first two. I haven't listened to all of them yet, but I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, thank you.
So, and we'll close with some good bull, an opportunity to recognize someone else for something great that they have done. You got any good bull for us today?
Yeah, I would like to recognize my wife.
Oh.
My wife is coming up on her 15-year sober date.
Oh.
And she's not only successfully sober for 15 years, she's devoting her life to helping others live a more healthy life, and especially people with chronic pain and people who have addiction, but just people in general. I think she's just really inspiring that she's pretty much devoting her life to helping others manage their life in a more healthy way. And so love to recognize her for that.
I have a family member who had a sobriety birthday recently as well. Those are very impressive milestones. I don't, at some level, it's hard for me to get to understanding the compulsion that a person is generally born with, that makes them eventually have to seek sobriety. But I think doing our best put ourselves in the shoes of people who struggle with things like that is a big part of developing empathy, which I'm sure you'll agree is just vitally important.
Absolutely.
To the human experience. So, congrats to your wife, and and best wishes with that walk in the future. So, any final thoughts? You almost always have something on your mind. Any final thoughts for the listeners?
Well, I'll just I think I'll just conclude by thanking you. This is thank you not only for inviting me, but thank you for this project. It's a great idea. I love to see your creativity at work here, and I applaud you and Shannon and the program for doing this. I think it's a great idea, and look forward to hearing what guests you have in the future.
I'm looking forward to it too. As we discussed before we went live, I just have this need to understand people and to know why they are the way they are and what makes them do the things they do, find out what they fear, what makes them brave. What do they keep to themselves? I want to know those things, and I'm not afraid to tell them those things about me either.
Yeah, that's great.
So, anyway, so that concludes our show today. Thank you guys for tuning in. We appreciate you. We appreciate the opportunity to share ourselves with you, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, and gig 'em. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to stay up to date on our latest videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. If you're in a rush or on the road, you can still join us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. If you want to learn more about us or our guests, please visit our website at mays.tamu.edu/podcasts. Also, please check out Mays Business School's academic programs. They're the sponsors of our show, and you can find them in the description. Thanks, and gig 'em.